Jaimie, I'm super stoked to meet you. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to get started talking.
Yeah, no, and before we started, we were talking about you being in Utah, which is a beautiful, beautiful place, and also having spent some time up in Lake Placid, New York, my
hmm
old stomping ground. Literally, used to spend every summer of my life up there.
It's
And
beautiful in the summer.
isn't that incredible? Yeah, the whole town of that area. For people who haven't been upstate New York to that Adirondack Park, it really is a treasure. 6 million acres of protected wilderness, over 5,000 freshwater lakes, and unbelievable athletic activities and infrastructure. By the way, I don't know if you knew this, but they're putting like 200 million into the infrastructure for the winter sports out there because of the university games will be held there
Oh,
soon.
I
Yeah.
actually was not aware of that. But yeah, I would go up and I would live at the Olympic Training Center and I would go to the water amp park. And
Uh-huh.
that's when you ski down plastic and you flip into a pool to
Right.
practice for aerials and slopestyle and half pipe. And when we weren't training, I'd go to the lakes and go on hikes. And sometimes my family would come out to visit me and they would just go camping. They would just sleep
Yeah.
camping because it's so beautiful there. And
Yeah.
we actually got one of our dogs who unfortunately she just passed away this summer.
Oh no.
But
She must have loved it up there.
yeah, she came from Lake Placid and we actually found her in a grocery store, an advertisement in a grocery store.
Is that right?
And the first time we picked her up, they were camping. And so they picked her up, and the first night she was sleeping in a tent.
That's awesome. She probably love that. I've, I have a lot of questions, and we're going to get into this, but I first have to ask you, Mo Crazy. Like, did your dad just adopt that name just because it was cool, or where did that come from?
That's a great question. So, my actual birth last name is Crane Mosey. And so
Crane Mosey. Oh,
Crane Mosey, and the Crane is from my dad, and Mosey is from my mom. And my
okay.
mom actually wanted to have us all be the Mo Crazies right away. But my dad actually didn't like that. And so they hyphenated, and Mosey is AU and it's French, and it was mispronounced a lot. And my mom liked the name Mo Crazy and had a daughter who was Mo Crazy. So
Right?
she dubbed me her little Mo Crazy. When I was about 10 months old, I actually climbed the drapes in our living room and got stuck at the top. And she came running outside and said, "Oh, my little Mo Crazy." And that name just stuck. And then it got stronger when I was competing because the
Right.
announcers would say, "Jaimie Crane Mosey, the Mo Crazy is now on course." And then after my accident, my little sister started the hashtag MoCrazy Strong. It's on
Right.
my wrist. I
Right.
have it as a tattoo. And that was the idea that Mo Crazy, me,
Right.
was going to become strong again. We'll talk more about the accident,
Yeah. Oh,
but
of course. Yeah.
within 24 hours, she started the hashtag Mo Crazy Strong, and that's developed into our
So
nonprofit
that became your
and
de
my
facto
legal last
last
name.
name. Did you have to legally change it so, like, when you pay taxes and whatever, or people pay you, it doesn't get confused?
I
Like,
did legally change
you
it.
did legally change it?
And part of that was because I actually just got married at the end of May.
Oh,
And
congratulations. Wow.
thank you.
Exciting.
My husband, when we were talking about names and like what would happen and things like that, he was kind of agreeing and supporting me that I should become who I've always wanted to be and who I felt most comfortable in my identity. So I would legally change my name to Mo Crazy. He kept his last name Clark, and then our kids will be Mo Crazy Clark.
Nice. Well, thank you for clarifying that. I had a hunch that there was some story there because it's
Yeah, because
such a
Mo
cool last name.
Crazy is a name that will catch
That's
catch
right.
your
Oh, that's
attention.
awesome. So let's talk about when you were, early Mo Crazy. Maybe not as early as climbing the drapes, but what was childhood like? You grew up in kind of the Northeast, similar to me. You said
Yeah.
Connecticut or New Hampshire. What was it like, and what were your parents like, and what were some of the influences that helped shape you?
So as a child, there was a couple of things. My mom had a master's in psychology, and she had
Mhm.
a federal grant from the government to teach self-esteem to women. And
Nice.
so I was raised by this woman. And so when I was a kid, I never really understood whether girls could or couldn't do things because they were girls.
Hmm.
I just was taught to understand that if I performed at my own personal best and set attainable goals, I could reach the growth goals that I wanted to set. And
Mhm.
so I just had this understanding and became competitive at a very young age and was very good at competing. When I was 9 years old, I actually won state championships in gymnastics. And the very same year, I won state championships in skiing.
Wow.
And I was interviewed, and I said in the article, my sports fantasy was to combine skiing and gymnastics on
Mhm.
snow,
Mhm.
which I ended
This is
up
before
doing.
that really existed, right? Pretty
Yeah,
much?
I didn't really know how I was gonna do it because I was
Right.
actually a ski racer, so I did ski racing and gymnastics,
Mhm.
but I wanted to combine both, and when I was 9, X Games didn't exist, and then when
Right.
it started, girls weren't in X Games, so
Right.
it took a ways, like, when I was competing, slopestyle and half pipe were not even Olympic events,
Right.
and so now they're both in the
When did
Olympics.
they start to become popular and then become Olympic events? Give us a time frame.
So skiing for freestyle, it started in like the 2000s as an X Games
Mhm.
sport. So it started gaining in popularity, and then X Games was getting really big reviews and even stronger reviews in some sports than the Olympics were getting, and they were getting a lot of attention. And so a lot of those sports that were X Games sports have now become Olympic
Interesting.
sports.
Right.
So they made that transition. But actually, when I was 17, I was competing at Junior World Championships in skiing and slopestyle skiing in New Zealand.
Mhm.
And at Junior World Championships were some members from the International Olympic Committee, and I ended up winning Junior World Championships. So they interviewed me on why it would be beneficial to add slopestyle skiing into the Olympics.
Mhm.
And
What
so
what by
I
the way, what is slopestyle skiing for people who aren't
Good
familiar?
question. So, slopestyle skiing is when you have multiple jumps and rails and you're judged on your overall impression. So, like your style, your degree of difficulty, whether you spin to the left, spin to the right. So, from the top of the run, you'll have 3 or 4 jumps and you'll have 3 or 4 rails, and you're
I see.
judged from the top of the run to the bottom of the run.
Wow. Interesting. It's almost like a combining skateboard and skiing into an event.
Yeah.
No, not skateboarding, I mean snowboarding. Yeah. Fascinating. Okay, so, you did this interview and then did they bring it in the Olympics after that, or where are we at now in terms of your
Um,
journey?
yeah. So, a few years after they brought it into the Olympics, the first Olympic event it was in Sochi, Russia.
Right. Okay, I remember that.
And I actually went to the test event in Sochi,
Mhm.
but then I actually not my big injury. I had a different injury um, the year of that Olympics.
Mhm.
And that was something that was a bit challenging for me because I always, since I was a child, I was raised by the belief I could accomplish what I wanted. And
Mhm.
my belief was that I was going to go to the Olympics. That's what
Mhm.
I really wanted. And I was going to take the steps and make that happen. And I never went to the Olympics, and I'm never going to go to the Olympics. And that was a huge challenge for me because
Mhm.
after that first Olympics, when I had the knee injury, I was like, oh, it's fine. I'm still like 21 years old. Like, I'll go to the next Olympics. And then I had my traumatic brain injury and I stopped competing.
Mhm.
And the next Olympics that happened was actually a mess. I was crying all the time.
Oh,
I
I
was
bet.
unable to,
I
I
bet.
couldn't really hold myself.
Mhm.
So that was one of the big challenges I went through mentally and
Yeah,
emotionally.
just dealing with that loss of the unfulfilled dream. Well, we can come back to that. Can you discuss, the incident? Are you comfortable discussing your accident and kind of what that was like? What the experience was like, at least going through it, and then the aftermath.
Yes. And
Okay.
so my big accident was on April 11th, 2015. I was
Mhm.
going to World Tour Finals up in
Mhm.
Whistler, Canada. And I was actually driving up with my little sister, Jeannie, who this was the first World Tour Finals that she made to compete in half pipe.
Oh,
So
cool.
she was going to compete in her first World Tour Finals.
Mhm.
But on the day we're talking about, it was slopestyle. So Jeannie was actually watching me. She gave me a hug as I dropped in for my second run.
Hmm.
And I was sitting in fourth place. And as someone who had been ranked first or second overall in the world for 3 consecutive years, fourth place is not on the podium.
Hmm.
It
It's
doesn't
not.
really count. No one remembers the fourth place finisher. So I had to upgrade from my first run to my second run, my off axis backflip to an off axis double backflip.
Wow.
Because 2 years prior, I had become the first woman in the world to compete a double flip at X Games, and I was still the only woman who was competing a double flip. So I had a really good chance of getting high on that podium.
Mm-hmm.
And on this run, my sister gave me a hug. I dropped in. I took off. She couldn't see my landing because of the jump, but she saw that I didn't hit the next jump, which happens in slopestyle quite frequently. But then she heard the radio crackle to life, the ski patrol radio saying we
Hmm.
need all hands on deck and a
Oh no.
helicopter on standby. And in an instant, she
Oh.
knew it was bad. And then when she skied down to me, she saw me spewing blood,
Oof.
convulsing, and my eyes were rolled back in my head. And that was
Do you
really
remember
bad.
what happened, or is it not clear still to this
I
day?
don't I don't remember
You don't.
anything that happened,
Nothing.
which is
Interesting.
interesting because it changed my life. But I don't remember a few days prior. Before that, I do have memory, and then I don't remember 6 weeks after,
Really?
because I was in a coma for 10 days. And then
Wow.
when I woke from the coma, I had serious amnesia, which means absolutely no memory, kind of like the star of 50 First Dates,
Yeah.
but I wasn't as okay seeming as
Hmm.
she was. Um, but
What
I
does that
wouldn't
mean? So
remember.
could you remember what happened in a day, but not the next day, or just you couldn't
I
remember
have no
moment to moment?
memory. I like looking back on it, that chunk of life, I have absolutely no memory of.
Oh, it's crazy.
And day to day, I don't have any recollection of what happened during that time.
Right.
But what my mom was living with me in the hospital, and my family would visit me all the time, and they would say how I wouldn't I could barely know who my immediate family was, but I wouldn't know who any of my friends were. There was pictures all around the wall of my friends, because that's something my genie did. Was I originally went to Vancouver General Hospital, and then I was airlifted in a Learjet from
Mm.
Vancouver to Intermountain Medical Center in Murray, Utah, and in Salt Lake City. And when I was airlifted, I was actually still in the coma. And so when
Mhm.
I arrived in Salt Lake City, she decorated my wall with all these pictures. And she did that in Vancouver as well, all these pictures, so that when I began to come back, I would be
Mhm.
able to rebuild my identity and figure out who I was. But that was something we actually did when my mind was beginning to return. Some of my first memories are looking at my friends, and having to remember who, like, recite who they were, what was happening, what was going on.
That's incredible. So aside from the memory gap, and you don't remember the day to day experience, but do you remember this just sense of being present with your family at all? Did any of that thread through, even though you didn't remember specifics around what happened?
Well, it's interesting because I don't remember, like, coherently, like I
Right.
can't tell you exactly what happened. But when I was in the coma, one of the doctors was saying how, according to the statistics, I had a really critical case, and my
Yeah.
fatality report was written, and I was
Oh, no kidding.
originally not expected to survive by a lot of
And this
people,
is
a lot of
just
doctors.
head trauma, or was it spinal trauma
It was
or
head trauma. I had
head trauma?
8 spots of bleeding in my brain and
Oh,
damage to my right brainstem, which paralyzed the right side of my body.
okay. By
And
the way, has that come back, or where do you? How's your physical health now?
my physical
Yeah.
health is great.
You're able to
And
walk and
yep,
perform every.
I'm
That's
able to
fantastic
walk,
to hear.
able to ski, go to bar class, do Pilates. I'm
Thank
very
God.
active.
Wow.
And
You must feel
one
very
of the
fortunate, by the way, and around that,
Well,
huh?
it's very fortunate, and one of the
Mm.
things about it is what we do with MoCrazy Strong, what we're passionate about, is that a lot of the things in my recovery are miraculous,
Hmm.
however, can also be repeatable, because
Mm-hmm.
with neuroplasticity and rebuilding your brain pathways, the
Mm-hmm.
statistics for regaining mobility after brainstem damage are still in single digits.
Wow.
However, if you do things like when I was in the hospital, starting when I was in the hospital, my mom would tape down my good hand and make me make breakfast with my weak hand, and
Mm-hmm.
forcing me to use those muscles
Right.
reopened and recreated different
Mm-hmm.
pathways so
Mm-hmm.
that it started to work again. And when I
Mm-hmm.
left the hospital for over a year, she would still tape down my right hand. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, you can't do this for like 8 hours during the day, or even an hour probably during the day. She would just do it for like 20 minutes or a half
Mm-hmm.
an hour. The longest was like an hour that it would be taped down. So you do it short. You don't want to
Mm-hmm.
overstress yourself and overstimulate yourself. But you have to force your body to reuse that side that got damaged.
Right.
And many individuals who have brain injuries and they do have body impairments after, and a lack of mobility, they do the opposite. So instead of taping down their strong hand and making them make breakfast, and at the beginning, it took me an hour to make cereal
Mm-hmm.
and pour milk and cut up the
Mm-hmm.
strawberries with a plastic knife.
Wow.
It was so hard.
I bet.
And so the family caregivers do the opposite. They think, oh, my family member, they suffered this huge trauma. Why don't you hold your cup in your left hand? Why don't you open
Mm-hmm.
with the left hand? Here, I'll help you cut that up. I'll help you do this.
Right.
I will
They
support
enable the
you,
injury to be permanent.
but I'm actually coddling you.
Right.
So I'm putting a brick ceiling on your recovery process. So you're only going to get to this level.
Yeah.
And a lot of doctors do that as well. My older sister is a doctor, and I think very highly of doctors. However, a lot of times when they say, like, what started this tangent was talking about when I was in a coma, and the
Mm-hmm.
doctor said, one of the doctors, I had some fabulous ones, but
Mm-hmm.
one said she will never be able to live independently. We don't know if she'll ever walk again. She definitely won't ski again. She will never be normal. And I woke up telling my mom, I want to be normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never wanted to be normal in my life before that. I was a professional
The part
skier.
of your conscious was able to be present and hear that. It's just the
I never
brain
knew
wasn't able
that.
to store the memory. Yeah.
And then I literally said, and this was during my amnesia time, so I don't
Mm-hmm.
have memories of this, but I literally said to my mom, that man told me I will never be normal. I just want to be normal. I
That's
just
awesome.
want to be normal.
Right.
And they're doing more and more studies that people are receptive
Of
in
course.
comas. They
Mm-hmm.
understand, they know a little bit about what's going on,
Right.
which is actually one of the protocol changes that Vancouver General Hospital actually did after my traumatic brain injury and the
Mm-hmm.
care that my family did. And we're actually coming out with a short documentary,
Mm-hmm.
and the doctor who was in charge of my neurocare, Mapinder Sakon, he's actually interviewed in it saying they changed their protocol because they were taught that family members would stimulate the brain, so keep them away from critical coma cases.
Mm.
And my family basically didn't listen. So they would
Mm-hmm.
touch me and they would sing to me and they would read to me,
Of
they would
course.
pet me.
Yeah.
And now
Because
they're
the brain needs to be
realizing
stimulated.
that your brain needs to
Yeah.
come back.
Right.
Obviously, if you go to a disco and it's overstimulated,
Sure.
that's bad.
Yeah.
However, family stimulation is very beneficial to a brain
Yeah. I
injury
agree. And
recovery.
in addition, and I'm sure they're doing this to be very careful what you say in the presence of a coma victim,
Yes.
right? Because they're, awareness and um, cognition, right, are two separate things, right? Cognition requires a healthy brain, right? And that's what you experience. Your cognition was temporarily stunted or shunted down or
Hmm.
interrupted, but it didn't mean that you weren't aware, right? And you still had the rest of the functioning of the nervous system and just pure witnessing awareness itself, which again gets more into the metaphysics of what is that compared to the use of the brain for storing memory and making meaning and whatnot. And there's little study of this in the medical profession because how do you study awareness? And they have this belief that awareness is the same as consciousness, which comes from brain activity, whereas the spiritual traditions say that awareness comes from your spirit and it innervates your brain and then your brain creates cognitive, kind of a representation of reality. And so when, I actually know a lot about this because I studied this stuff relentlessly myself, not because I was a victim of anything, because I'm just fascinating with the subject of how the mind works and what is the difference between consciousness and awareness and all that. So when you go into a coma, your awareness is still present. It's
Mhm.
just not, doesn't have use of the brain to communicate, right?
Yeah.
And the brain itself isn't capable of storing memories. And so those two, then, the brain has to heal and come back online for you to be able to communicate what your awareness was able to perceive during that time
Yeah.
frame, which is what you did. Like, you came,
Mhm.
once you were able to communicate again, then you were able to basically express something that they didn't think you were able to perceive because they had this mistaken view of what awareness and consciousness is. I don't know if that
Yeah.
makes any sense.
I
Probably
no,
does to you,
I
but
I do agree on that a lot, and, it's interesting because there's a lot of my belief, that I experienced in my recovery, and MoCrazy Strong has helped with our peer-to-peer guidance and some of
hmm
the other individuals and families that we've been working with on like family involvement, and education.
hmm
Because similar to you, my mom, who was a like smart brain
yeah,
person,
yeah,
also studied early childhood brain development,
hmm
and so that allowed her to have ideas and be an active family caregiver for
hmm
brain redevelopment. And
right,
so that's why she knew about taping down my hand and
hmm
making me use this hand. And
awesome,
I had to relearn how to walk, relearn how to talk, relearn all of my basic gross motor skills, everything that I learned, during your education
hmm
years and everything
hmm
like that. I had to relearn how to read, relearn how to write. I became her full time job for a year
of
because
course,
we were literally relearning how to write like a kindergartner again,
that's amazing,
and having to relearn all those things. But one of the big things is that it is possible to relearn. And that's
hmm
something a lot of people don't understand
right,
and are taught that it's not possible.
yeah,
I actually had a sister who was studying um, neuroscience at Brown University. I have a couple of sisters, but one of them was studying neuroscience at Brown University. And she had a big disagreement with a professor because the professor was teaching them that after a brain injury, if you only had a certain amount of recovery opportunities and potential. And she was like, but I think like anyway, so they had a disagreement. And this was like probably like about 15 years ago. And it's just phenomenal. So my other older sister, who went to Georgetown Medical School, she was taught by the doctors that scientifically you had 2 years of recovery after a brain injury and then the deficits were permanent. Again, that's scientifically false.
right,
There's so much the
right,
society has learned about
hmm
brain injury recovery that is scientifically false.
that's right,
Like an example, you should not go if you've had a concussion, a mild concussion, you should not go turn the lights off and do absolutely nothing because if you don't stimulate your brain, you're not going to recover.
right,
You shouldn't go drink a lot of coffee. You should not go to a disco,
hmm
but you should go for a light walk and
that's
do
right,
little
yeah,
exercises that will stimulate your blood flow,
yeah,
but don't jar your brain. But you
right,
need stimulation. So there's just
hmm
so much we could talk about, you and I, about
hmm
brain injury recovery teachings that are scientifically false.
well, it's not just the only area where the science is way off. Let's just leave it at that, right? And so, but it's a big and it's a really important one. And I agree with you. They're just barely understanding the power of the brain and also the totality of the brain, and also the fact that the brain isn't just in your head, right? In my view, I call it the body mind. My view is the body is the brain. The brain is basically spread throughout the body. The part that's in your head that we call the brain is, if there were a most important component, that would be it. That's the meaning maker. Most of the functions are, but it's not the only part of your brain, right? They now know that there's neurological processing power and neurotransmitters in your heart and in your biome and in your
Your
enteric
gut
nervous
biome.
system. Yeah, and now they even think maybe in your fascia and your skin. Your body is your mind. Your body becomes your mind, but the brain that's in your head is critical, which is why it's stored in this very hard device. The problem is it's just floating in that device. And so even micro trauma has an effect on it. This is why a lot of my SEAL teammates and why I'm really involved in brain health and brain injury healing for vets is because every vet, especially special operators, have TBI and they don't know it,
Hmm.
or they're ignorant of it,
Yeah.
or they're in denial of it. Because every time you shoot a gun, every time you have a hard parachute
Hmm.
landing fall, which is every time practically, every time you blow something up, and especially if you're in combat, poof, it gets magnified. So
Yeah.
then you take it to another extreme. Like if you have a massive trauma to your brain, that brain is just getting bounced around in there big time and just smacking against the walls. And then what that means, those injured areas of the brain then have to heal, and they're not getting the blood flow they need and everything. So unless you stimulate them lightly, they're not getting the blood flow and the oxygen and the energy they need to recover. But so that's just part of it, is recovering the traumatized parts of your brain. But the brain itself, at any one time, you're using just a small percentage of your brain. In
Right.
certain areas, like we say, okay, this area of your brain is for your olfactory, and this area is for your auditory, and this area is for your visual, and blah blah blah. Guess what? Your brain can relearn that stuff in other healthy areas of your brain, which is what you were proving,
Hmm.
right? Doesn't mean
Yeah.
those old areas won't come back online and share the load. But while they're healing the traumatized area, the rest of your brain can pick up the slack and start to really open up and take on some of those functionings. And this is what you were
Yeah.
proving. It's
And we have
amazing,
we have trillions of synaptic
right?
connections, and there's so much in our brain that even if it's like right next door, and so this path
Mm-hmm.
was shut but this path opens right next door,
Mm-hmm.
you can heal and live a good life. But one of the things that popped into my mind that you were mentioning about your brain being part of your body,
Mm-hmm.
when I was recovering in the hospital, my older sister would bring in organic food every single day. She would
Mm-hmm.
bring in meals for me because we recognize how your brain is your body, which
Mm-hmm.
means that the food you intake,
So
so
important.
like
Yeah.
it all affects it so much. And
Right.
my mom is studying mind body, a PhD program, and her specialization is on brain injury recovery, because we are so passionate about it as well, because there's so many things like your food choices.
Mm-hmm.
Most people, a lot of people don't recognize that it actually plays a role in your recovery,
Mm-hmm.
and that certain things like coffee and alcohol right after a brain injury will affect your brain, and also sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Sugar has such an effect on your brain after a
Right.
brain injury that I didn't have any coffee or sugar or alcohol for the year.
Wow.
Now, I personally am not super stringent on a diet. I don't have a diet. I try to eat healthy and I make choices on things, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm open to eating a percentage of everything. So I don't have a strict
Mm-hmm.
diet.
Mm-hmm.
But I do passionately believe that if I had had coffee right after my accident, or if I had had white sugar right after the accident, it would have affected my recovery.
Yeah, I totally agree. So from the fueling intake, if there's a traumatic brain injury, it sounds like three big no-nos are obviously caffeine. Is it the caffeine or the coffee that's bad? Like, could you drink a decaffeinated cup of coffee, or is it?
It's the caffeine that affects
It's
you the
primarily the
most.
caffeine. Now, there's other toxins in coffee too that probably aren't good for the brain. So alcohol, obviously, that's no brainer, and white sugar, man, that's evil for the body in general, but
Mhm.
certainly for the brain.
And one of the things, so when you're recovering, everybody has those days that you just feel blah and you
Yeah.
just
Hmm.
need comfort food and you need
Hmm.
something happy. And you can make comfort food that doesn't have sugar in it
Right.
without being like a super health nut. Like I
True.
make a banana bread, and when I actually met who's now currently my husband 5 years ago, He didn't think he could like a dessert that didn't have sugar in it. And I made him my banana bread, and I didn't tell him it didn't have sugar in it, and he loved it. And then a couple months later, I was like, "There's no sugar in it. There's some honey in it,
Right.
and you caramelize the bananas, because honey still has that sweetness
That's
factor,
right.
but it's much
Well,
better
and
for
you
you
and you
than
don't
sugar."
have that crash. I mean, once you recognize this and you get off of it, and it takes, like for our clients, it takes a few weeks for them to detox from their sugar addiction. Then all of a sudden they have all this energy, right? And all
Yeah.
this clarity because the brain is getting healthier. And also, like you said, you can eat those healthy, tasty treats, but you don't end up with that crash. Then where I'm going with this is like if someone puts a donut in front of me, like after one of our long seal fit weekends and whatnot, during the event, I haven't eaten in 18 hours or something. Someone puts a donut in front of me, I might have a bite just for the hell of it, and I actually feel horrible after that. Right? I enjoy taking that one bite, and then I immediately feel the sugar rush and then the crash just from one bite of donut. Right? So it creates this massive contrast. You're like, holy cow! There was a time in my life where I could eat 3 donuts and I would still crash, but my whole system was like propping up, this dysfunctional, habit and creating long-term distress in the body. Right.
Hmm.
Anyway, I'm not sure if
Yeah.
I had a really good point there, but it's just
Well,
once you
just
get off and the addiction starts to just tame itself, then the contrast is extraordinary, right? Both how good you feel when you don't eat it, even if you eat a healthy treat, when you don't eat sugar, but also how bad you feel when you do, when it sneaks in or you deliberately do eat it. And those
yeah,
right
and
there,
I
you got to listen to your body. It's telling you the truth.
and that's something that just made me think of moving on, is that people will say, do you pay attention to what you eat? Yes. Do you take supplements for your brain health? Yes.
Hmm.
They'll say, "Oh, so you're completely healed. Like you don't worry about it." And I was like, "No. Like our brains, we always need to pay attention to our
That's
brains
right.
because we're always getting older. We always have to be conscious of things."
100% agree with you.
And so my choice is actually, our house is sugar free,
Hmm.
but I do go out and have ice cream, and
Hmm.
I don't actually feel as terrible as you were saying, but I don't eat it very often.
Hmm.
But I do sometimes in other places have sugar, but
Hmm.
in our house we make alternative choices, to still get that comfort food or that
Yeah.
sweetness without sugar in it.
Yeah.
And it's surprising. When we make like pancakes or waffles, we make them really simple. It's just like eggs, a little bit of baking powder, flour, milk,
Hmm.
and that's about it. Sometimes you put some cinnamon in or other
Hmm.
things, but most of the time when you go out to a restaurant, your pancakes will have sugar in them,
Of course.
and
Yeah.
you don't need sugar in all the stuff that's sugar
Yeah.
is in.
No, I'm with you. I haven't had pancakes in years. I veer mostly toward paleo, keto, type, but I don't consider myself to be on any particular diet either. I eat what my body tells me is healthy and what's good, and I consider this training. And so there's training for recovery, which is what you've done mostly, but now you've shifted to training for life, which is what we teach at SealFit. It's like we train for life, and what does that
Yeah.
mean? You cut out the bad and rebalance your body, and then in order to keep your body healthy, you optimize your nutrition, your sleep, your exercise, and everything, and then you work on an incremental program to actually improve the quality of your thinking. And this is a mental development through meditation, visualization, and other techniques,
Yeah.
as well as the emotional development, clearing up the shadow items from your past. So we call it integrated development. Because if you're not training yourself, the world's training you. And once, let's say absent a traumatic injury like yours, once you get to a certain age, the expansion phase of your life is over and you begin the contraction phase, right? And so then it requires a lot of pushing against that inertia of the energy of kind of like what we would normally think of as aging, right? To include the brain, aging.
Yeah.
So we have such extraordinary mental powers as human. We're barely tapping into it, which your story has helped prove, to include the ability to constantly learn and grow and improve the capacity and the power of the mind using the
Hmm.
brain, right?
Yeah. And one of the things, I was actually introduced to an individual about 4 months after my brain injury, who sells BEMER Beamers. I don't
Hmm.
know if you've
I've heard
heard
of
about
those.
them.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
But I started using it in my recovery process. And whenever I became agitated, because emotions were a huge invisible challenge
Hmm.
for the next couple
I
years,
bet.
they were really relevant after my brain injury. And it took the longest time for me to be able to settle them down. But
Hmm.
so when I became like flustered or upset, I would go lie down on the beamer, and it what it does is it's a mat
It's
that
electromagnetic,
activates the
right? Yeah.
oxygen. It's electric magnetic, and it
Yeah.
activates the blood flow through
Hmm.
your body.
Hmm.
And so I would lie on it, and kind of a combination of like what the beamer does, and then also what you mentioned about meditating and
Hmm.
calming your mind.
Hmm.
I would just lie there and try to calm myself down, and then by the time I was done, it's about 8 minutes, and by the time I was done with that, I'd be able to articulate why I was upset, what could happen, instead of just getting super flustered and out of control.
Hmm.
Which, after brain injury, that's one of the big lifetime challenges that some people
Hmm.
face. And it's one of the invisible
That's
challenges,
right.
is that your mind, you become a little bit irrational. So
Right.
you can feel it. So
Right.
when I was beginning to recover, I could feel myself almost getting like pulled, like when I started getting upset, and I would just get really upset and then
Hmm.
tied up, and then I wouldn't be able to think anything through. And so I would just behave and respond irrationally and stressed out. And then if I calmed myself down
Hmm.
and increased my blood flow and things like that, then I'd be able to articulate why I was unhappy with something.
Hmm.
And then mostly, I don't really know any of them that weren't solved,
I bet.
because usually when you
You
can
can't
calm
solve a
yourself
problem
down.
if you're all hyped up, right, and hyper
Yeah.
aroused. So you gotta get into that de-aroused state and calm everything down, and then a you can feel and let the energy flow a little bit better, and b you can make more sense of it, and at least then begin to objectify it and solve the problem. I think what you're describing back to the vet situation, one of the reasons there's so much suicide amongst veterans and first responders is because of that hidden nature of TBI, right? Traumatic
Mhm.
brain injury, and especially when it comes in small doses over a long period of time. If you have small doses of TBI every week over 10 years, it's no different than getting clunked in the head a couple times in a big incident.
Right.
It just then slowly creeps up on you, and you never have the pause to say, wait, something just happened. Let me look at my brain health, right? And so suddenly 10 years into it or whatever, after a career in some cases, they have a seriously traumatized brain, and yet they've never
Mhm.
been told it, and they're in denial about it because they're supposed to be, healthy,
Tough.
tough, exactly, grit through anything. And what that does is it affects their emotional imbalance and their ability to make sense of
Relationships.
reality, and their decision making suffers. And I had a really good friend, 30-year retired Master Chief Navy SEAL, outwardly just so squared away, such a great guy. He killed himself in April. And it was so surprising to everyone because we're like, everyone, he was not one of the ones that was suffering, right? He wasn't a down and out case. He was like me. And yet he never paid attention, right, to the trauma, and it crept up.
Sorry to hear that,
It's horrible. I know. God,
but
I'm still sad thinking about him and what his family and all that. My point for
yeah.
bringing it up is you are doing such great work with your foundation. And people need to know that it doesn't take, it's not just limited to a professional skier who bonks her head on a ski jump, right? This is something that practically everyone in our culture is dealing with, right? Trauma happens in many different ways.
Mhm.
And trauma can come just from, just being emotionally abused, right? That affects they now know that affects your brain, just like getting clonked in the head with a
Yeah.
stick, right?
And
So
we have
it's
4
important
point
work you're doing.
well, thank you very much. And there's 4.3 million individuals every year in the US that have disability insurance help because of a traumatic brain injury. And the cost to society,
It's
Finkelstein
huge.
and his colleagues did a study to find out the cost to society for traumatic brain injury is $76.5 trillion, which
Incredible.
is
And this is
insane
largely
because
because we're
it's
not bringing them
invisible.
back. Yeah, we're not bringing them back into healthy functioning because it's like, oh, sorry, you're on disability, and it sucks that that happened. So
Yeah.
you're trying to change that narrative. Say it happened, and it happens a lot, and a lot of that is, by the way, a lot of it's unreported, so it's probably higher than that. Especially
Yes.
the
And
trauma that,
undiagnosed.
yeah, micro trauma and trauma that is undiagnosed because it's emotional trauma. That's not being reported,
Yeah.
but all of it's healable. I think is
Yes.
what you're saying. I agree.
And that's what I'm really passionate about and why we're working on changing policy levels.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because NASHA, NASHIA, they created a bill that was um, passed bipartisan in the Senate, and it was signed by President Biden on August 16th. And it's a 5-year training program um, for first responders and the police force on how to respond to individuals who've encountered a traumatic brain injury or a PTSD, because they're realizing that a lot of the mild traumatic brain injuries cause lifetime deficits that could be completely healed. A
Right.
lot of the individuals who have lifetime disability insurance, and if you look at somebody like me, I was 22 when I had my traumatic brain injury. You're looking at like 80 years of help. That is really draining on us, actually, on our
Hmm.
economy.
Yeah.
If
Big
you could
time.
just fix it right away by a little bit more upfront care and awareness and education.
Yeah.
And NASHA stands for the National Association of State Head Administrators. And so
Hmm.
it's the organization that works with all the different state
Good
affiliates
for them.
on their traumatic brain injury funds, protocol, the different.
Okay.
Um,
We've talked
yeah.
around a lot, but let's see someone listening as either themselves dealing with a prior injury or they know someone in the family or someone that's two things. One is what should they do like right now or not do? You know, what are the top three things? Let's just say that we already talked about nutrition, training. So what are the top three things you recommend if there's that? And then how do they find out more information from you and your organization, or how do we support them best? I guess is what I'm asking.
So I think some of the top things are, as we already talked about, nutrition,
Hmm.
outdoor therapy, getting
Hmm.
outside
Hmm.
and experiencing. Like I started my outdoor therapy when I was in a wheelchair in the hospital. My
Nice.
family would bring me outside.
I love it.
Um, so outdoor therapy, and then one of the things, like as you're in the whole process of recovering, believing that you can recover is
Yes,
so important.
indeed.
I don't know how to like quantify, and as you said, that there's not tons of research and study on like the different things that we talked about, but how important belief is.
Right.
If you believe you can recover, and then you start taking steps to do it.
Hmm.
So you believe that you're going to have a recovery, and then you do things like you make the choices. You make the choice to eat this versus this because of the outcomes that you're going to receive. So
Hmm.
you make choices, you build the habits. Habits change your synaptic connections. So you actually can change your brain because of the habits that you build. So you believe that you can do it, and then you build the habits that will make those beliefs come true.
Right.
And then you'll be able to recover and live a life that you want to be living. And even if you have permanent changes in ability level, because there are permanent changes in ability level
Hmm.
that do happen. I have a friend actually who, when he was a teenager, he got his leg amputated due to cancer. And he had been a skateboarder. His goal was to become a pro skateboarder. He got his leg amputated. He began snowboarding and he won a gold medal in the Olympics.
No
So
way.
it's a change in his ability. His life
So
is
amazing.
permanently changed, very different because of his injury that he encountered. However, he could still build an amazing life. You can still climb any
Right.
alternative peak that you want to
Because he
if
believes.
you start out with that belief. and then make that belief come true.
Yeah.
And you can find out more information with mocrazystrong.org. MoCrazyStrong.org is
Mm-hmm.
our website. And then also Jaimie MoCrazy is my Instagram.
Okay.
And I'm pretty active on Instagram. And if you message me, I will respond. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time because if we're not mutually following each other, it gets pushed a little bit. But I do always make an effort to read through um, the messages that I don't have connections to and respond to the people who reach out to me. So the best way to reach out to me personally is on my Instagram,
Nice.
Jaimie MoCrazy. And then we do have a MoCrazy Strong Facebook, and we do have a website, mocrazystrong.org.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find out more information. And if you are a brain injury survivor or you have connections to one, we do offer some peer-to-peer educated guidance
Mm-hmm.
and education. We're actually both my mom and I are certified in
Mm-hmm.
peer-to-peer,
Nice.
as well as person-centered, which is something that we do a lot of behind the scenes stuff, like going to different
Mm-hmm.
hospitals and education portion, but teaching individuals and trauma centers to see each person as a person,
Mm-hmm.
not as a patient.
Mm-hmm.
So see them
I love
as
that.
somebody who has interests, likes, and dislikes
Mm-hmm.
versus a patient who has numbers and statistics. Because if you
Mm-hmm.
just stick to those numbers and statistics, I would not be having the conversation with
Right.
you today that I'm having.
Right.
Because if you looked at my statistics, it would not be possible for me to have the recovery that I did. However, I can do it and other people can as well
Yeah.
if they have the belief, and
Yeah. I agree
they
with that.
do.
I mean, you can be a victim of a tragic incident, but if you remain a victim, you'll never heal.
Very true.
Right. And so that is both in terms of how you see yourself and how others treat you. So if you're listening to this and you had an incident and you still feel like you're being victimized by others or you feel like a victim, this time to get out of that rut because you'll never heal and get back on back to your fullest potential in the future. That's amazing. Thanks so much, Jaimie. What an incredible story. You're a very strong woman, and you're going to inspire a lot of people, and you already are. So, and the message that you're getting out and what you're doing is really important. And thank your mom for us as well. It sounds like she was your bedrock through all this, and your sisters. Without them,
Yeah.
it would have been a very different story, probably. So, thank
They're
you.
they're the heroes.
It's amazing. Yeah.
It's a story about me, but anybody who watches our documentary, it's a short documentary, and we're starting to submit it to film
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
festivals.
Nice.
So next year we'll be in film festivals. And I will share the trailer with you because we're trying to raise attention
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
some crowdfunding for some of the last
Oh,
sources, so we
please
can
share
just
it. Yeah, we'll put it in a.
share it out.
Yeah.
But you can see during the short, it's very relevant that the story is Jaimie MoCrazy had the accident, but there are so many other heroes
Mm-hmm.
that created that story and just gave me a platform to share what they did. Because we didn't even get started talking about the person I call Miracle Mip, my
Mm-hmm.
doctor Mipinder
Mm-hmm.
Sakon, who went to Cambridge, England to learn about the oxygen and pressure analyzing brain bolt that I became the first patient in North America to use. He's a hero. So
Mm-hmm.
there's so many heroes in the MoCrazy Strong story.
Mm-hmm.
And none of them are me. I just get to
Right.
tell them all. I get to talk about all the amazing individuals that I was fortunate enough to get to interact with and who saved my life and created the story.
Wow. I love that. It takes a team, right?
It
It takes
does.
a team. Awesome. Well, Jaimie, thanks again. We will we'll put that stuff up on the on the show in the show notes and everything, and everyone can go check out mocrazy.org is the website, correct?
It's MoCrazy Strong. So
MoCrazy Strong. Got it.
MoCrazyStrong.org.
Thank you for that clarification, and we'll reach out to you on Instagram as well at hashtag Jaimie MoCrazy.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And
Well,
I'd love to, I'll definitely share it when
yeah, we'll do that. I
hashtag.
mean, I'll connect Q with you, who's our guy that is working on the social media stuff. And thanks again for your time. And it's been a really, really powerful interview. Appreciate you.
Yeah. I'm glad we got to meet up. I know there's a couple like back and forths
Yeah.
that we couldn't do it, but now we did. And I think it was wonderful. And whenever I have these conversations, and you probably as well, you just get so inspired to
Yeah,
live the rest of the day. You're in such a good mood,
I
or at least
100% agree.
I get in a good mood.
Awesome.